Hey everybody, I got a video here for you today, and this is from a comment. I was just asked a question if I knew anything about Cincinnati and ancient earthworks, and I didn't. I knew about all the earthworks like places like Newark and other places, but never knew about Cincinnati. And what I found really surprised me, just because I didn't know about them. I did an Ancient America series 3 years ago, and I'm well into this one. Never knew about this. But this is Cincinnati, the home of WKRP and Jerry Springer and the Big Red Machine. But this area of town, well... But looking overhead here, I have this fairly well lined up. You see Central Avenue going up right here. Well, on Daniel Drake's 1815 map, I just tried to line up Central Avenue right here. But this is where the earthworks were, and this is present-day Cincinnati. But I find this fascinating. I've talked about St. Louis and Detroit and Pittsburgh and other places. It appears the earliest structures were clearly giant earthworks that were built maybe 1,000 years at least before these cities were. But let's just do a little reading from a website that I thought was really good and where this map comes from. Now here is an article from Cincinnati Magazine. I thought this was very well written, and I'm just going to read portions of it here. It says, "There's nothing left but Mound Street's name." And how many cities have a street named Mound Street? Or a Mound Park? Or something like that? It seems they were all over the country. The whole flat plain of Cincinnati's basin was once overspread with prehistoric earthworks, including walls and mounds. And here is a map from Daniel Drake in 1815, and this is an overlay of where these earthworks were and where the city was laid out in 1815. But here is Daniel Drake's 200-year-old earthwork diagram overlaid, transposed onto a contemporary Cincinnati map. And it looks like 3rd Street was the border, and then it went all the way over to Broadway, and then just west of Central Avenue, and right here on, looks like the location is 4th and 5th Street and Vine, there was a large circular henge, probably some sort of sun temple, and it looks like a little structure on this side of it, and maybe if you were in the central part of the henge, this would have been pointed towards the summer solstice sunrise. That's just a guess. And maybe these mounds to the west had something to do with sunsets in alignment with this mound, but that is just a guess. But this is what it looked like in Cincinnati. Now, the only accounts of these, besides that one diagram, is pretty much some written records that almost go back 2 centuries. And I'm just going to read. It says, "The earliest settlers of Cincinnati saw them, even though the area was heavily wooded. William Henry Harrison, who arrived as a young officer at Fort Washington, participated in a survey of these mounds, accompanying General Mad Anthony Wayne." But Harrison recalled this in an 1837 address to the Historical and Philosophical Society of Ohio. "When I first saw the upper plain on which that city stands, it was literally covered with low lines of embankments. I had the honor to attend General Wayne 2 years afterwards in an excursion to examine them. We were employed a greater part of the day in August, 1793, in doing so. The number and variety of figures in which these lines were drawn was almost endless, and, as I have said, almost covered the plain. As early as 1794, Colonel Winthrop Sargent, Secretary and Governor pro tem of the Northwest Territory, sent a report on Cincinnati's burial mounds to the American Philosophical Society. His letter, published in the Society's Transactions, described an ancient tumulus or grave in the western country. Mounds such as those found at Cincinnati inspired patriotic fervor for the new United States, as Robert Silverberg noted in the June 1969 American Heritage magazine. To the early European settlers of North America, this land had one serious shortcoming. It lacked visible signs of a past. Egypt had her pyramids, England her Stonehenge, Greece her Acropolis, But those who came to the green new world failed to find those traces of awesome antiquity on which romantic myths could be founded. As Silverberg noted, men in search of myth will usually find one, and the mounds of the Ohio River Valley provided a firm foundation for myths about a long-gone ancient race, able to stand alongside the Druids, Trojans, and Ostrogoths. When Robert Clark wrote in his 1876 book on the prehistoric remains at Cincinnati, he emphasized that these mounds must have predated the American Indian tribes uprooted from this land by the European settlers. Clark took pains to point out the immense size of the trees growing atop the mounds, proof of their antiquity. The largest of the Cincinnati earthworks may have been a stockade enclosing a small village. As Clark describes it, the central work, a large, broad ellipse, was located about 350 feet from this bank and extended from the west side of Ray Street nearly to Walnut, and from a little above 5th Street to a little below 4th Street. It was about 800 feet from east to west and 660 feet from north to south, and that makes it one of the largest earthworks in ancient America. It consisted of an embankment 3 feet high, and surely that had been eroded away, with a base of 30 feet. It was composed of loam, evidently taken from the neighborhood. There was no ditch on either side. Within the wall, the ground had its natural, uneven, or wavy surface, with nothing to indicate manual labor expended in leveling or grading. A similar stockade, narrow and elongated, crossed what later became Washington Park. In addition to these stockades, a half-dozen conical mounds were proven to be burial monuments containing beads, tools, shells, and minerals in addition to human remains. Daniel Drake, in his 1850 Natural Statistical View, or Picture of Cincinnati, drew the locations of some of the major earthworks on a map included in his book. In the text, Drake describes these ancient works as he described them, including the mound that gave Mound Street its name, located at the intersection of 5th and Mound Street. Its present height is 27 feet. About 8 feet were cut off by General Wayne in 1794 to prepare it for the reception of a sentinel. Drake reported that an excavation of this mound revealed only a few scattering decayed human bones, along with some pottery shells and animal bones. When the mound was totally demolished in 1841, workers found the famous Cincinnati Tablet. Now this is the Cincinnati Tablet, and I just haven't looked into this that much, but it's curious it was found in these ancient mounds in Cincinnati. But here is what it looks like, a little more blown up. I'd be curious to hear comments on this. I haven't looked into this that much, but what is represented on here, I have no clue. Is this tree of life symbolism or something like that? That has been one theory, but I don't know. It says Clark and others drew comparisons between the Cincinnati Tablet and Egyptian cartouches, just as they compared the mounds themselves to Egyptian pyramids. And the comparison to the Egyptian cartouches, well, I don't really see it. It was part of an effort to prove that North America had been visited by almost any civilized race imaginable, whether Israelites, Vikings, Persians, Romans, Hindus, or Phoenicians, rather than attributing the mounds and artifacts to any culture related to American Indians. Silverberg captured the deluded prejudices of the Victorian mind. But it just concludes this way. It says, we now know that the mounds and other earthworks were indeed the creation of the ancestors of the American Indians. Most of the Cincinnati earthworks were from the Adena culture, which flourished in the Ohio River Valley from 1000 BC to 200 BC, so they were at least 2,000 years old when William Henry Harrison first saw them. And looking at all these mounds, we certainly have different periods of what we call mound building. There is the Adena culture around 2,000 years ago that seemed to put in the henges or earthworks as well as certain type mounds. Once again, here is some giant henges and earthworks and mounds overlaid on present-day Cincinnati. Those of you in Cincinnati, I might have another Cincinnati video coming up for you in the next month. An interview with Mr. Pete Rose. I have talked to him about it. It's just all a matter of timing. That's what I want to do. That is a little history of some ancient earthworks in present-day Cincinnati that are totally lost to time and history and memory, pretty much. Hope you thought that was interesting. You all have a very nice day.